Oh, nothing. Just the most important position on the field today on the old Morning Pitt. Let's talk about quarterbacks. We talked a little bit about a quarterback and touched a little bit on quarterback topics in general yesterday, but let's talk a little bit more about quarterback stuff here on today's Morning Pitt. Let's talk about the quarterbacks on the roster, how the roster got to its current state, what we think about the quarterbacks going forward, and what will probably just be the latest in an ongoing discussion of Pitt's quarterbacks this season and what the Panthers need out of them heading into 2024. It's all quarterbacks here on the Tuesday edition of the Morning Pitt, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. You know, when you want to boil down what's happened to Pitt or has happened for Pitt or with Pitt over the past, X number of seasons, it pretty much always comes down to the quarterbacks. And I mean, that's not exactly groundbreaking stuff right there when we're talking about football. Pretty much anything you've seen happen in the world of football over the past 15 years or more, and probably more, but certainly in the last 10 or 15, it's all about quarterbacks. And if the quarterback is good, the team is good. And if the quarterback is bad, the team is bad. And it more or less tracks almost 100% along those lines. So when we talk about Pitt football in 2024, it's inevitably going to be about the quarterback, because when we talk about 2023 and 22 and 21, it's all about the quarterback. I mean, you could pretty much tie the team's success or failures directly to the quarterback. 2022 maybe being a bit of an exception. We'll talk about that in a second. But certainly last year, certainly 2021, and this year, for sure, it's going to be about the quarterback. So where do things stand with the quarterbacks right now? And I'm sort of I have quarterbacks on the brain after the news, which we talked about yesterday, of Mason Heinchel committing to Pitt in the recruiting class of 2025. The quarterback committed in the class, presumably the only quarterback in the class, but we'll see how those things kind of shake out. A high school kid, when we've seen a lot of transfers over the last X number of years, and we'll talk about that as well. There's always something interesting to talk about with quarterbacks. I think the topic of quarterbacks is always an interesting one, breaking down the roster, breaking down the recruiting, because it ties so directly and so closely to the success or the failures, really, of the team. You know, from 11-3 to 3-9. Both of those records were a direct result of the play at quarterback. So I think we got a lot to talk about in that regard here. Of course, we've had a lot of conversations about the quarterbacks on Panther-Lair.com. That's the website, Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com. Pitt will be back in the South Side for practice today for spring camp, week number 3. And we will, we'll have lots of coverage from practice later this morning. And certainly some of that is going to be talking about the quarterbacks. We'll probably have video of the quarterbacks. We'll probably have photos of the quarterbacks. And we will certainly be writing about what we see from the quarterbacks and what we've heard about the quarterbacks coming out of Saturday's scrimmage. It's a big topic, and we are covering it in as many ways as possible on Panther-Lair.com. So if you're a Pitt fan, you want to stay up to date on all the latest Pitt sports news, whether it's football, basketball, recruiting, or anything else going on in the world of Pitt sports, the place to do it is at Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com. And then, of course, you know what we do here. It's our YouTube channel, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com, where we have all of our Pitt video content, whether it's these daily morning Pitt videos, Monday through Friday, every day of the week to get your day started with a little bit of Pitt talk. Or it's our weekly live stream that we do every Wednesday night. We'll be live tomorrow night for that at 8 o'clock with Jim Hammett and me talking Pitt sports with you. Or if it's, post-game shows, which obviously we don't have a lot of right now, but when the games are happening, we do post-game shows after every football game. We do post-game shows after every road basketball game. And those are always fun and interesting to do. I thought we'd have a few more to do this year, specifically this past week. But Pitt missed out on those opportunities or didn't get that opportunity, and so here we are. Nevertheless, we do those all right here at youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. So if you want to make sure you don't miss any of our Pitt video content, subscribe to our YouTube channel. Subscribe button is right down there. Just click that. We'd really appreciate it. It makes me feel good to see those numbers go up, and it also makes me feel really happy to see when you like this video. So like and subscribe. That's what all the cool YouTubers ask you to do. And I would like to fancy myself a cool YouTuber, so I'll ask you to like and subscribe. All right, quarterbacks. Let's talk quarterbacks. Mason Heinchel committed over the weekend. We talked about him a lot, a decent amount yesterday. 2025 quarterback prospect. He's finishing up his junior season at Clay High School in Oregon, Ohio. Still can't get over that little town. Somebody said apparently it's near Toledo. I'm still on a quest to find out if all the states have a town in Ohio named after them. Be interesting to find out. I still haven't looked that up. I probably haven't thought about it since I taped the Morning Pitt for yesterday. But now I'm thinking about it again. I'll forget about it by the end of this thing. So the first thing that's interesting, and we talked about Mason Heinschel and how he fits in and what he might tell us about Cade Bell's quarterback preferences and what kind of quarterback Cade Bell likes. And so I'm going to assume you watched yesterday's Morning Pitt. We won't get into that too much unless I run out of other things to say, and then I'll just repeat myself from yesterday. But I'm going to assume you watched that yesterday, so we don't need to get too much in the evaluation side of Mason Heinschel. A couple of things that are interesting to me is when you look at the makeup of the quarterback room, and it's not necessarily a new phenomena, the preponderance of transfers. And that signing, or at least getting a commitment from Heinschel, and we'll see where it ends up being, if it ends up, it's only March, right? I mean, we'll see what ends up happening by signing day. I mean, and that's not just anything about him or quarterbacks. It's just any kid who commits, particularly early, we'll see where they end up on signing day. But assuming he sticks, that will make 3 years in a row that Pitt has signed a high school quarterback recruit. 3 years in a row. 2023, they signed Ty Diefenbach. This past year, they signed Julian Duggar, and then Heinschel would make it 3. The last time they signed a quarterback 3 years in a row was 2017, 18, and 19. High school quarterback, I'm talking about. Of course, Kenny Pickett in 2017, Nick Patty in 2018, Davis Bevel in 2019. They didn't sign anyone in 2020. They signed Nate Yarnell in 2021, and they didn't sign anyone in 2022. High school guys we're talking about again. And I bring this up because it's interesting to see that in the last 3 off seasons, Pitt has signed 4 transfer quarterbacks. 4. You have to go back 6 off seasons to get 4 high school quarterbacks. So in the last 3 off seasons, prior to the 2022 season, they signed Keaton Slovis. Last year, they signed Phil Dracovic and Christian Veyer. This year, prior to the, coming into this January, they signed Eli Holstein, right? So 4 quarterback transfers over the last 3 off seasons. You have to go back, obviously, like we said, 2020, this off season, they signed Julian Duggar. Last year, Ty Diefenbach. 2 years before that, Nate Yarnell. 2 years before that, Davis Bevel. So over the course of 6 off seasons, they signed 4 high school quarterbacks. And over the last 3 off seasons, they've signed 4 transfers. And I think there's a lot to say about that. I think there's a lot to look into in that regard. I think, and there are a few things at play. You really backdate it to Kenny Pickett in the 2017 recruiting class. And by the end of the 2017 season, he was in place as the starter and was never going to be replaced as the starter. He was the starter entering in 2018. He was the starter entering 2019. He was the starter entering 2020 and 2021. And so that probably impacts a little of what you're able to do, although they signed, Nick Patty, who was committed before Kenny Pickett ever even played a game. They got Davis Bevel to commit. And he committed relatively early, but I think, he's still committed prior to the 2018 season. So, you knew that, Kenny Pickett was seemingly coming off of the Miami game in 2017. He was looking like the pretty committed starter at that point. And then you really had a lull there where 2020, 21, and 22, they only signed 1 quarterback recruit. And I think a big part of that, not all of it, but a big part of that is Mark Whipple just really didn't do a whole lot of recruiting. He wasn't really big on recruiting. He didn't really hit the road much. He didn't do much in that regard. I think Whipple probably looked at it like, well, I've got Kenny Pickett. I don't really need anyone else. I'm not going to be here all that long. And I mean, I shouldn't actually suggest that entirely because I don't know what Mark Whipple was thinking. I think he also was just an old coach who probably didn't want to go on the road all that much, didn't want to do that much recruiting. And so they had a couple of big gaps in there. And he brought in Joey Yellen prior to 2020 as a transfer from Arizona State, effectively, basically the high school recruit for that year. I mean, he wasn't a high school recruit, but he came in with 4 years of eligibility. You get out of the 2021 season, though, and they don't have a quarterback committed, and it was all systems go on a transfer, and they go get Kedon Slovis. Before they even get an offensive coordinator, they go get Kedon Slovis for the 2022 season, for whatever that's worth. 2023, they have Kenny Minchey committed. He ends up flipping to Notre Dame, and then Frank Cignetti goes out and gets Ty Diefenbach. And that's for the 2023 recruiting class. But he also, turns his focus primarily after the 2022 season to transfers. And he brings in you remember the plan. It was the short-term transfer in Phil Dracovic and the long-term transfer in Christian Veer. It turns out neither one of them really played all that well. Veer had the huge win over Louisville. Dracovic was an unmitigated disaster. The bulk of which, it's funny what's sort of become of the Phil Dracovic era or how it's viewed. I mean, he wasn't good by any stretch of the imagination, but it's almost like Dracovic himself is off the hook. For Pitt fans, it's more about Frank Cignetti and Pat Narduzzi not recognizing how bad he was, that they went with him in the first place as the starter to open the season. They kept rolling him out there 5 games into the season before they finally made a change to Christian Veer. And that, it's like I said right off the top, that so many seasons, I mean, you can just tie the success or failures directly to the quarterback play. And 2023 stands as about as sharp an example as you're going to get on the negative side. 2021 being almost as equally strong representation on the positive side. 2022 is this weird sort of anomaly in between where Kedon Slovis didn't necessarily play well. I think he might have played a little bit better than people give him credit for, but he didn't really play all that well. And yet the team, for a variety of reasons, rallied in November to win 4 games in a row and then win the Sun Bowl. That was after they had already wasted the month of October outside of Izzy Abanikand's record-setting performance, but the Georgia Tech game was a disaster, the Louisville game was a disaster, and the Carolina game could have been more competitive, but what are you going to do? They rallied and won those 4 games to end the regular season in the month of November. Slovis still didn't really play all that well in those games. I mean, Pitt's defense spotted him a 2-touchdown lead at Virginia. The Syracuse game was a close one. The Duke game was a close one, a grinder. I forget what the other game was in there. Oh, the Miami game in the regular season finale, which, he actually he put up some numbers there, largely because he just kept forcing the ball to Jared Wayne to get him over 1,000 yards receiving for the season. But 2022 is a year where they end up going 9-4. And I think you could tie quarterback play to the fact that they went 9-4 as opposed to, 11-2 or something like that. That they missed the ACC championship game, whereas better quarterback play, even average quarterback play, would have won the Georgia Tech game and the Louisville games. And now you're, instead of 8-4 in the regular season, you're 10-2 and likely, you have one ACC loss, and you're probably going to the ACC championship game. And so you could point to quarterback play as being the difference there, but it wasn't like, for as much as we talk about how bad Kedon Slovis was, you would have expected that season to be 6-6 or worse. And it wasn't. It ended up being pretty decent. So that's a rare season where the quarterback play and the season results don't entirely line up. Certainly not as strong of a correlation as there is in 2021 and 2023. So where are things heading into 2024? We talked a lot about Mason Heichel, but he's not going to impact things for this season. He's not part of it. Who is part of it? Well, Nate Yarnell comes back after starting the last couple of games of the 2024 or 2023 season. Christian Veer's back after starting a few games before Yarnell. Ty Diefenbach is back after redshirting. Julian Duggar came in as an early enrolling freshman, and Eli Holstein came in as a transfer from Alabama. I think, and I've said a few times, I mean, I'm coming around more and more on the idea of Nate Yarnell being the guy. I think he's been pretty solid every time he's played. I mean, literally every time he's played, he's been pretty solid. Not necessarily great, but pretty solid. And given what we saw certainly through the first 5 games last year and even a couple games after that. Wake Forest, Syracuse, even you could make a case for the Florida State game. But given what we saw for a few games, for certainly the first 5 and a few games after that, and then even what we saw in October of 2022 and beyond, really, just solid quarterback play would be an upgrade over what Pitt has gotten for, let's see, the last 2 seasons they've played 25 games, right? And really, you could throw the Peach Bowl in too. So the last 26 games, how many games out of those 26 would you say Pitt has had just solid quarterback play? Slovis against West Virginia? Slovis against Miami? I mean, like, you want to tell me Nick Patty against, UCLA? All right. I think he made some big plays. I wouldn't necessarily say he was solid throughout the game. You go back and look at his numbers. They're as bad, if not worse, than anything Slovis did in the 12 games before that. Patty could have been the guy in the Peach Bowl, but that didn't work out because he got hurt early on. And then last year, I mean, I think Bayer played well against Louisville. Yarnell was fine. Pretty solid against Boston College. Yarnell was pretty solid when he came in reserve work in the Notre Dame game. Although at that point in that game, I'm not sure how much you're really going to take away from it. But how many games you really look back and say, boy, they had really solid quarterback play in that game? Not a lot. Out of the last 26 games of Pitt football, not a lot of really solid quarterback play. And so if Nate Yarnell can provide that as a floor of solid quarterback play, shoot, they might just win 7 or 8 games just by virtue of showing up to some extent. You know what I mean? I've often said, and we talked about this last year, of you in college football, I mean, it's kind of like that point where we stopped really giving 1,000-yard season all that much credence in the NFL because we realized it wasn't really all that impressive and it wasn't that big of a number to reach when you're playing 16 games and now 17. It's sort of like that. Like going 6-6, going 500 is not. I mean that you should have 8 wins as the floor in any given year. You know what I mean? And then exceptional things push you over the top, or exceptional things going, bad luck push you underneath that number. Nate Yarnell feels like he should be solid enough to get them into that range. I think we realized last year, I remember talking last year about, it's not that hard in college football to win 6 games. I held Boston College up as evidence. No disrespect to Boston College, but if that team was able to win 6 games, anybody with a pulse should be able to win 6 games. Not that Boston College was the worst team I've ever seen or anything like that, but that team was evidence that even if you're not good, even if you're having a bad year, 6, you still should never fall below 6 wins, which really kind of shines a light on what Pitt did last year when they not only fell below 6 wins, they only won 3. So you just, you start with the floor of solid quarterback play. And I think Yarnell provides that as well, if not better than anybody on the team. I think there are still turnover concerns with Christian Bayer. I think Ty Diefenbach is still really raw. I think Julian Duggar is really raw. I mean, I think he's pretty promising. I hear things that he's making some plays here and there, making some nice throws, impressing people, maybe looking a little bit further ahead than they expected him to be. But probably still not to the point where he's going to get on the field this year or really be in the heart of that competition. Eli Holstein is a bit of a wild card. A guy with a great pedigree, a guy who obviously got recruited by Alabama, went to Alabama for a year, by all accounts did well on the scout team at Alabama. So, I mean, you're playing against a pretty good defense if you're putting up, if you're having success on the scout team at Alabama, you're doing pretty well because you're playing against, a lot of NFL guys on that defense. Could he be in the mix? You know what I mean? Could he be the guy who ultimately pushes Yarnell? Because I just, as I sit here right now, I just don't know if I see Bayer overtaking Yarnell. I don't know if I see Diefenbach overtaking Yarnell. And I don't know if I see Duggar overtaking Yarnell, not this season. So it really might be either Yarnell or Holstein. It's funny, we just had a conversation on the message boards yesterday about, on these podcasts, it's more just reaction. It's not really about like news and stuff. And maybe, what I just said is my opinion, but I'm going to write it probably in my spring camp report today because this is something I've been thinking about lately. I really think it's going to be one of those two guys. I don't really see, like I say, I don't see any of those others really jumping up and unseating Nate Yarnell. I think if anyone's going to do it, it's probably going to be Eli Holstein. But we'll see. I think, and if he does, he'll have earned it, and if Nate Yarnell holds on to the job, he'll have earned it too. But the state Pitt is in right now with quarterbacks, it's an interesting one. If you look at the 5 scholarship guys we just named, there's three guys who came here out of high school, 2 guys who came here out of, as transfers. And it's an interesting mix, and it's interesting to see a group with 3 high school guys and 2 transfers. I really don't think. It's hard to imagine that all 5 will still be on the roster by the fall. You know what I mean? It's the transfer portal. It's quarterbacks. It's college football in 2024. You're probably not going to keep 5 scholarship quarterbacks. You're probably not going to be able to keep 5 scholarship quarterbacks. I would guess one of these guys decides to go between now and the fall. I could be wrong about that, and if I am, feel free to point it out. But that's just sort of my guess. I don't have any inside intel or anything like that on who's going or when they might be going or whatever, but that just feels like the kind of thing that would happen in 2024. But as long as it's, I think even if they lose somebody to the portal, they'll still have 4 pretty quality options to go to as they head into the 2024 season. And that position, even with the new offense and maybe a bit of a schematic advantage, or at least, the scheme itself, the system itself being more of an advantage than previous offenses were the last 2 years. Even with that, whatever advantage comes from the scheme, it's still going to come down to the play of the quarterback. The quarterback is going to have to be the one who elevates this offense. And if the team succeeds, it's going to be because the quarterback played well. And if the team doesn't succeed, it's going to be because the quarterback struggled. Now, I don't know if it'll reach the levels of 2021, and hopefully it won't reach the depths of 2023, but it'll probably track pretty closely between the two: team success, quarterback success. So we'll see what happens. We'll have a full report from spring practice later this morning on Panther-Lair.com. Tell you about everything we saw and everything we thought and everything we're hearing and all that stuff. Certainly going to talk about the quarterbacks for sure. So make sure you tune in for that later this morning, right there at the website, Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com. Of course, you want to make sure you don't miss any of our Pitt video content right here at youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Like this video and subscribe to our YouTube channel, and you will be locked in for everything we do. All right, appreciate you watching the video today. Hope your week got off to a great start yesterday. Hope your Tuesday goes well. Leave a comment. You have a thought about things. Like and subscribe, and we will catch up with you tomorrow for the Morning Pit right here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com.